I remember the metallic taste of blood in my mouth when the apothecary told me I was rejecting the gene seed. My name is Cadius Vorn, failed aspirant of the Ultramarines chapter, and I survived what most don't. They don't tell you this on the recruitment worlds, when they select the strongest boys and promise them glory as angels of death. They don't mention what happens to the 90% who fail the transformation. You think rejection means a clean death, a quick end to honor your attempt. But you don't know what the chapters really do with bodies that have been partially transformed, minds that have been psycho-indoctrinated, souls that have touched the Emperor's genetic legacy and been found wanting. I've seen the servitor facilities. I've walked the halls where the failed become something else entirely. This is my testimony before they find me and finish what they started. Chapter 1. Selection. The recruitment ship descended on Macragge's southern continent during the season of fire, when the twin suns turned the sky the color of blood and the heat made the stone streets shimmer like water. I was 14 years old, standing in a line with 300 other boys in the central plaza of Fortress Lyceum, all of us stripped to the waist so the chapter serfs could examine our physiques. Every one of us had trained our entire lives for this moment. The selection trial that came once every 5 years. The chance to become something more than human. My father had been a failed aspirant himself back before I was born. He'd made it through the first 3 implantations before his body rejected the Biscopea, the second heart that all Space Marines received. They'd sent him back broken but alive, missing organs and barely functional. He'd spent the rest of his life as a chapter serf, maintaining the weapons that warriors who'd succeeded where he failed used to carve the Emperor's enemies apart. He'd trained me every day since I could walk, pushing me harder than any of the other fathers pushed their sons, determined that I would succeed where he had not. "Don't show weakness," he told me that morning, gripping my shoulders with hands that trembled from damage the apothecaries had never fully healed. "Whatever they do to you in the trials, whatever pain they inflict, you endure it. The chapter doesn't want boys who cry out when they're hurt. They want warriors who can have their arm torn off and keep fighting. You show them you're worthy, Cadius. You show them our bloodline deserves the gene seed." The trials began at dawn. 300 boys entered the testing grounds. 17 would emerge at the end of the week. The rest would die during the trials, or be sent home with scars that marked them as failed aspirants, forever shamed in the eyes of their communities. There was no middle ground in the Ultramarines' selection process. You either proved yourself worthy of becoming a Space Marine, or you proved yourself worthless entirely. The first trial was endurance. We ran for 16 hours straight through the mountain passes north of the fortress, carrying 60-pound packs filled with stone, no water, no food, no rest. The chaplains followed us on bikes, their skull-faced helms watching every stumble, every moment of weakness. When boys fell behind, they were marked with paint rounds from bolt pistols and left where they collapsed. The trail was marked by bodies, some still moving weakly, others completely still. I saw Kalen, who'd been my training partner for 6 years, fall at the 13-hour mark, his legs simply giving out beneath him. He was crying as we passed him, begging for just a moment to rest. The chaplain marked him with a red paint round to the back and kept driving us forward. I finished in the first 50. My lungs felt like they were full of broken glass. My legs were trembling so badly I could barely stand, but I'd finished. 50 boys out of the original 300. The apothecaries examined us in silence, running medical scanners over our bodies, taking blood samples, measuring bone density and muscle fiber composition. They didn't speak to us or acknowledge our achievement. We were specimens to be evaluated, nothing more. The second trial was pain tolerance. They strapped us into chairs in a clinical white room that smelled of antiseptic and old blood, and they hurt us. Systematically, professionally, methodically. Electric current through nerve clusters to simulate battlefield damage. Controlled burns to test our reaction to fire. Bone breaks in fingers and toes to see who would scream and who would stay silent. The chaplains watched with their emotionless skull helms, judging not just our ability to endure, but our capacity to remain functional while enduring. I bit through my tongue during the burns, blood filling my mouth as they pressed the hot iron to my ribs. But I didn't scream. I kept my eyes on the chapter symbol painted on the wall, the Ultima on its field of blue, and I thought about my father's hands trembling as he'd gripped my shoulders. I would not fail. I would not give them reason to mark me unworthy. The boy next to me, Servius, screamed during the first burn and kept screaming until they dragged him out of the chair. I never saw him again. 32 boys remained after the pain trials. The apothecaries took more samples, more scans, more measurements. They were building detailed biological profiles of each of us, determining which bodies had the genetic compatibility necessary for the transformations ahead. Some of the boys who'd endured everything perfectly were eliminated at this stage simply because their genetics weren't compatible with the Ultramarines' gene seed. No explanation given, no appeal possible. They were marked as failures and removed from the fortress before dawn. The third trial was combat. They armed us with wooden training weapons and set us against each other in an arena while the full chapter watched from observation galleries above. No rules, no referee, no mercy expected or given. You fought until you won decisively or were beaten unconscious. I faced a boy named Theron who outweighed me by 40 pounds and had the reach advantage. He broke 2 of my ribs with his first strike, driving the breath from my lungs. But I was faster, trained by a father who'd fought actual Space Marines in practice bouts during his time as an aspirant. I got inside his guard and struck his throat, his knee, his temple in rapid succession. He went down choking, and I kept hitting him until the chaplains pulled me off his unconscious body. The fight should have made me feel victorious. Instead, I felt sick. Theron had been from my training cohort, a boy I'd known for years. I'd just beaten him bloody to prove I deserved the gene seed more than he did. This was what the chapter wanted from us. Not just the ability to fight, but the willingness to destroy others in the pursuit of becoming Astartes. The Imperium needed weapons, and weapons couldn't afford compassion. 17 boys remained after the combat trials. 17 out of 300 who'd started the week. We stood in a line before the chapter master himself, Captain Ventress of the 4th Company, who'd commanded the recruitment this cycle. He walked down our line slowly, examining each of us with eyes that had seen centuries of warfare, judging whether we were worth the gene seed that would be implanted in our bodies. "You have proven yourselves physically capable," he said, his voice resonating through the Vox speakers in his ornate armor. "You have endured pain and violence. You have demonstrated the basic qualities necessary for transformation. But understand this clearly. Most of you will still fail. The gene seed will kill approximately half of you during the implantation process. Your bodies will reject organs that were not meant for baseline humanity. You will die screaming in the apothecarian while the chapters best work desperately to save you. This is not a threat. This is statistical reality. You may withdraw now with no dishonor. You will return to your families and live normal lives." No one moved. No one spoke. Withdrawal was theoretically an option, but everyone in that room knew it was a lie. Boys who withdrew after passing the trials were marked as cowards, unable to serve the chapter in any capacity. They were exiled from Macragge's military culture entirely, forced to live as outcasts or leave the planet completely. Better to die during implantation than live with that shame. "Very well," Captain Ventress said. "You have chosen. The transformation begins tomorrow. The Emperor protects aspirants, though I suggest you pray to him tonight, because tomorrow you will learn whether his protection extends to you or not." They took us to the apothecarian that night, a massive facility deep beneath the fortress where the chapter's medical miracles and horrors occurred. The walls were lined with stasis tubes containing organs that no longer looked entirely human, gene seed cultured from the genetic legacy of Robout Guilliman himself, blessed relics that would either transform us into living weapons or kill us in the attempt. Chief Apothecary Claudius examined each of us personally, running final scans to determine the order of implantation procedures. He stopped in front of me, his augmetic eye whirring as it focused, scanning through my skin to examine the structure beneath. "Excellent bone density," he said, speaking more to his assistants than to me. "Good muscular attachment points. Neural response time in the 97th percentile. Genetic markers are positive for 15 of the 19 implants. This one has good odds." He turned to face me directly. "You're Vorn's boy, yes? Your father was aspirant class 17 years ago, made it to the Biscopea before rejection. You have a better baseline than he did. I estimate 70% survival probability through all implantation phases." 70%. Those were good odds by Astartes standards, where half of all aspirants died during transformation. But it still meant a 30% chance that I would die in the coming months, that my body would reject organs that had been surgically implanted, that my genetics would prove incompatible with the Emperor's legacy, despite everything I'd achieved. I thought about Theron's unconscious body in the arena, about Kalen crying as he collapsed during the endurance trial, about Servius screaming during the pain trials, about the 283 boys who'd started selection with me and wouldn't be here tomorrow when the implantations began. All of that sacrifice, all of that suffering, and I still had a 30% chance of dying before I ever fired a bolter in the Emperor's name. "Your father watches from the observation gallery," Apothecary Claudius said, surprising me. "He has requested permission to be present during your implantation procedures. I've granted it. Should you die during transformation, he will witness it. Should you succeed, he will witness that as well. Either way, your bloodline's attempt to serve the chapter will have its resolution." They led us to individual cells that night, small rooms with a single cot and a copy of the Codex Astartes for meditation. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I kept thinking about the 70% survival rate, about the 3 in 10 chance that tomorrow would be my last day as a conscious being. I thought about my father watching from the gallery, his trembling hands gripping the railing as he witnessed whether his son would succeed where he had failed. I thought about the boys who died during selection, and I wondered if they were the lucky ones. At least their suffering had ended cleanly. At least they hadn't lived long enough to learn what the chapter really did with failures. Tomorrow, the transformation would begin. Tomorrow, I would start the journey to becoming an angel of death, humanity's finest weapon against a galaxy full of horrors. Or tomorrow, I would become something else entirely. Something the chapter didn't talk about. Something that existed in the spaces between success and death, where failed aspirants were repurposed into serving the Imperium in ways that would make death look like mercy. The Emperor protects, they said. But as I lay in that cell waiting for dawn, I wondered who the Emperor protected us from. Our enemies, or the chapters themselves? Chapter 2, Transformation. The first implantation began at dawn in Surgical Theatre 7, a massive domed chamber where 5 apothecaries could work simultaneously on different subjects. I was strapped to a surgical altar that gleamed under massive lumens arrays, my body exposed and vulnerable, while Chief Apothecary Claudius prepared the secondary heart that would be implanted in my chest. Through a viewing gallery above, I could see my father's face pressed against the armored glass, his expression unreadable at this distance. "The Biscopea," Claudius said, holding up the organ in specialized forceps for his assistants to see. "The second heart, the first of 19 gifts you will receive if your body proves worthy. It is smaller than your natural heart, but beats faster, ensuring blood flow continues even in extreme trauma. Warriors have survived with their primary heart completely destroyed because this organ continued functioning. Your father's body rejected this implant. We're about to learn if you inherited his weakness or overcame it." They didn't use general anesthesia. Space Marines needed to function through pain that would leave normal humans catatonic. So the transformation process began building that tolerance from the first procedure. They gave me a nerve block that dulled the sensation to a constant throbbing agony instead of white-hot torture. But I remained fully conscious as they cut into my chest and began the installation. I could feel the apothecaries working inside my body, could feel the foreign organ being positioned and attached, could feel the sutures as they connected it to my cardiovascular system. The Biscopea began beating immediately, a strange flutter against my sternum that didn't sync with my natural heartbeat. Two rhythms in my chest, competing and complementary simultaneously. My blood pressure spiked as my body tried to adjust to doubled cardiac output. The monitors around me screamed alarms. "Compensating," one of the assistants said calmly, injecting something into the IV line that made my vision blur. "His system is fighting the integration. Blood pressure at 220 over 140 and rising." "Expected response," Claudius said, his augmetic hands working with precision no organic fingers could match. "His body recognizes the implant as foreign. The rejection response is normal. We'll know within 6 hours if the immunosuppressants can overcome his genetic defense systems. Finish the closure. Get him to recovery." They sealed my chest with surgical staples and bioadhesive, leaving a massive scar that ran from my collarbone to my solar plexus. The pain was incredible despite the nerve block, a deep aching throb that pulsed with 2 heartbeats instead of 1. They moved me to a recovery cell where I would spend the next week while my body either accepted or rejected the implant. The boy in the cell next to mine was named Marcus. He'd been implanted 4 hours before me, and I could hear him through the wall. Crying at first, then screaming, then making sounds that didn't seem entirely human anymore. The apothecaries came for him at hour 9. I heard him begging them to make it stop, heard them tell him calmly that his body was rejecting the biscopeia, that the secondary heart was failing and taking his primary heart with it. They would attempt emergency extraction, they said, but survival probability was minimal. Marcus stopped screaming at hour 12. The apothecaries removed his body at hour 13. They didn't tell us he was dead, but we all knew. 1 down, 16 aspirants remaining. The transformation had claimed its first casualty, and we were only on the first implant. I survived the biscopeia. The fever broke after 4 days, the dual heartbeat stabilized, and my cardiovascular system adapted to the enhanced blood flow. Apothecary Claudius examined me with his augmetic eye and declared the integration successful. I'd passed the first test. 18 more organs to go, each with its own rejection risk, each potentially lethal if my body decided I wasn't worthy of the gene seed. The second implantation was the osmodula, an organ installed at the base of my brain that would spend the next year flooding my system with growth hormones and causing my skeleton to grow and strengthen. They drilled into my skull while I was conscious, the sound of the surgical drill vibrating through my bones, and implanted the organ against my brainstem. This time, the pain was sharper, more focused. I could feel them working inside my head, could feel the pressure against my brain, could feel the moment when they activated the organ and it began secreting hormones directly into my cerebrospinal fluid. The changes began within hours. My bones ached constantly, a deep grinding pain as they began thickening and lengthening. My appetite became insatiable as my body demanded the raw materials for growth. I ate 6 times the calories of a normal human and felt constantly hungry. My clothes stopped fitting within a week as I grew 3 inches and gained 20 pounds of bone and muscle mass. I was becoming something other than human, 1 organ at a time, my body being rebuilt according to patterns laid down by the emperor himself 10,000 years ago. 3 more boys died during the osmodular implantation. Their brains hemorrhaged when the organ was installed, or their bodies couldn't handle the metabolic stress of rapid growth, or their cardiovascular systems failed under the demand for increased blood flow. Each death was recorded clinically in the chapter's records. Each body was removed efficiently and processed according to apothecarian protocols. We weren't allowed to mourn. Mourning implied that the deaths meant something, and the deaths were simply part of the process. Failed aspirants were discarded like defective ammunition. The chapter moved on. The third implantation was the catalepsian node, installed in my brain to regulate my sleep cycles. Space Marines could stay awake for weeks if necessary, taking brief microsleeps while remaining combat functional. The organ made sleep itself optional, a biological function that could be controlled rather than required. They cut into the back of my skull this time, the incision running from the base of my neck up to my crown, and implanted the node against my cerebral cortex. This implantation caused different problems. I couldn't distinguish between waking and sleeping anymore. My consciousness would slip in and out of dream states without warning, reality and hallucination blurring together. I would be talking to an apothecary, and suddenly they'd have 6 arms and be speaking in a language I didn't understand. I would be eating in the refectory, and suddenly I'd be back in the surgical theatre with my chest cut open. The node was malfunctioning, failing to regulate properly, causing my brain states to collapse into each other. The apothecaries considered removal. Failure of the catalepsian node wasn't immediately lethal, but it meant I couldn't continue the transformation. You couldn't install additional implants in someone whose brain couldn't maintain stable consciousness. I would be marked as a partial failure, transformed beyond humanity, but not enough to serve as a space marine. The chapter would have to decide what to do with me. I spent 2 weeks in that state, consciousness fragmenting and reforming, unable to tell what was real. I saw Marcus standing over my bed at night, his chest torn open, his secondary heart lying on the floor. I saw my father with tears running down his face, telling me I'd failed just like he had. I saw chaplains with their skull helms judging me and finding me wanting. And through it all, I heard whispers about what happened to failures, about servitor conversion and mind wipes, and being repurposed into serving the chapter in ways that would make me wish I'd died during selection. The node stabilized on day 16. One of the tech priests made an adjustment to its calibration, fine-tuning the organ's output to match my specific brain chemistry, and suddenly my consciousness locked into place. Waking was waking, sleeping was sleeping, and the two no longer blurred together. I'd passed another test. I'd survived another implant, but I'd come close enough to failure to hear what waited for boys who didn't make it all the way through the transformation. The implantations continued over the next 18 months. The preomnor to process toxic foods and drinks, the omophagia to gain genetic memory from consumed flesh, the multi-lung to breathe in hostile atmospheres. Each implant brought new pain, new risks, new chances for my body to reject the gene seed and mark me as unworthy. And with each implant, more of my fellow aspirants died or failed. Caven died during the Laraman's organ implantation, bleeding out when the organ that was supposed to clot his blood instantly failed to activate. Theron failed the melanochrome, his skin turning black and sloughing off as the organ malfunctioned. Servius made it to the hemastamen before his body simply gave up, overwhelmed by months of surgical trauma and biological transformation. One by one, the 17 boys who'd passed selection were reduced to 8, then 6, then 4. I survived them all. Chapter 3. The First Failure. His name was Petros, and he'd been in my training cohort since we were assigned to Scout Company. We'd survived the full implantation process together, received our black carapace together, trained in power armor together. For 2 years, we'd been brothers in everything but the final oath that would make us full battle brothers of the Ultramarines. We'd fought orcs on Quintan, Tyranids on Espandor, traitor militia on a dozen worlds whose names I've forgotten. We were scouts. The final stage before becoming true space marines, proving ourselves worthy in combat before receiving the chapter's colors. The incident happened on Damnos, during the early stages of the Necron awakening. Our scout squad was performing reconnaissance in the tomb complex, mapping out Necron positions before the main assault. Standard operation, the kind of mission we'd run 100 times before. Petros was on point, moving through the ancient corridors with his shotgun ready, when the Necron appeared from a stasis field we hadn't detected. A flayed one, its metal frame covered in rotting human skin, moving with inhuman speed. It hit Petros before he could react, driving him into the wall with enough force to crack his enhanced bones. I heard the impact through the Vox, heard Petros cry out in pain and shock. The flayed one's claws tore through his armor, raking across his chest and abdomen, opening him up from collarbone to hip. Blood that should have clotted immediately from his Laraman's organ poured out in arterial sprays. Something was wrong. The wound should have sealed itself within seconds, but it wasn't closing. We killed the flayed one and dragged Petros back to the extraction point. He was conscious the whole time, screaming that something was wrong inside him, that he could feel his organs shutting down one by one. The apothecary met us at the Thunderhawk, his narthecium scanning Petros immediately. The prognosis was devastating. Multiple implants failing simultaneously, rejection cascade triggered by trauma, body attacking its own enhanced organs. The Laraman's organ has necrotized, the apothecary said calmly as we lifted off from Damnos. The preomnor is hemorrhaging. The os medulla is breaking down and releasing uncontrolled growth hormones into his system. His body is rejecting the gene seed, all of it, simultaneously. This is a complete implant failure. He needs immediate extraction surgery, or he'll die within 6 hours. They took him to the apothecarian on the strike cruiser, Ve Victus. I watched through the observation gallery as 5 apothecaries worked on Petros for 8 hours, cutting enhanced organs out of his body, trying to salvage what they could while keeping him alive. His screams echoed through the surgical theatre, even through the anesthetic. His body was destroying itself from the inside, enhanced organs that had been functioning perfectly suddenly attacking each other as his immune system went haywire. Chief Apothecary Claudius emerged after the 8th hour, his augmetic eye dim with what might have been exhaustion in a normal human. "We've removed 12 of the 19 implants," he told me, my father and Sergeant Tellian, who commanded our scout squad, the ones that were actively failing and threatening to kill him. The remaining 7 are stable but compromised. He'll survive, but he can no longer serve as Astartes. His body has proven too unstable to trust in combat. He's a failed aspirant, retroactively, despite completing the full implantation process. The rejection was simply delayed rather than immediate. "What happens to him now?" I asked, dreading the answer. Claudius's augmetic eye focused on me with mechanical precision. "That decision rests with the chapter master, but there are protocols for this situation. Petros has received extensive training, psycho-indoctrination, and biological enhancement. All of that represents significant investment of chapter resources. That investment must provide return. He'll be evaluated for alternative service roles, servitor conversion, chapter serf duty, or other positions where his partial enhancement can still serve the Imperium. Servitor conversion." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Servitors were lobotomized cyborgs, their higher brain functions removed and replaced with mechanical programming, turned into biological robots that could perform tasks too complex for pure machines, but requiring none of the autonomy or will that made humans difficult. The Mechanicus used them by the billions throughout the Imperium. Every facility, every warship, every manufactorum had servitor workers doing jobs too dangerous or mind-numbing for humans to perform long-term. The Adeptus Astartes used servitors too. Gun servitors built into weapon emplacements, medical servitors in the apothecarian, maintenance servitors in the armory. All of them had been human once, before their minds were scooped out and replaced with cogitators and programming. Some were vat-grown, purpose-built for servitor conversion. But some were criminals, heretics, or failures who'd been deemed useful enough in body, but not in mind. Failed aspirants, apparently, fell into that category. "You can't," I said, my enhanced vocal cords making my voice a low rumble. "Petros fought beside us for 2 years. He killed for the Emperor. He bled for the chapter. You can't just erase his mind and turn him into a machine." Claudius's expression didn't change. Apothecaries were trained to view aspirants as biological material to be processed, not individuals to be mourned. "I can and will, if that's what the chapter master orders." Petros volunteered for transformation. He accepted all risks inherent in that process, including delayed rejection and subsequent repurposing. The gene seed he carried has been successfully extracted and will be implanted in a more worthy candidate. His service to the chapter will continue in whatever capacity he's assigned. That is not cruelty, Scout Cadius. That is efficiency. I wanted to argue, to fight, to do something, but I was a scout, barely ranked above a servitor myself in the chapter's hierarchy. Sergeant Talion gripped my shoulder with his augmetic hand, the pressure a clear warning to stand down. My father stood beside me, his face pale, his hands trembling worse than usual. He'd seen this before, when he'd been a failed aspirant himself. He knew exactly what waited for Petros. They kept Petros in the recovery ward for 2 weeks, while his body stabilized from the organ extraction surgery. I visited him when I could, sitting beside his bed while he drifted in and out of consciousness. The apothecaries had him on heavy sedation to prevent his traumatized body from going into shock. The few times he was lucid, he begged me to kill him. He said he could feel the missing organs, phantom sensations of hearts and lungs, and glands that were no longer there. He said he felt hollow, like they'd scooped out everything that made him Astartes and left him as something less than human. "Don't let them turn me into a servitor," he whispered during my last visit, his hand gripping mine with what remained of his enhanced strength. "Please, brother, kill me if you have to. I'd rather die as Petros than live as a lobotomized machine with my face. Promise me, Cadius. Promise me you won't let them take my mind." I promised. I didn't know how I would keep that promise, but I gave it anyway, because he was right. Death was preferable to servitor conversion, to having your consciousness erased and your body turned into a programmable tool. Everyone in the Imperium knew servitors had been human once. Everyone preferred to pretend they'd always been machines. The alternative was acknowledging the horror of what was done to create them. The chapter master's decision came down 3 days later. Petros would not be converted into a servitor. That was the good news. The bad news was that his alternative assignment was barely better. He would serve as a test subject for experimental surgical procedures, allowing the apothecarian to refine their implantation techniques using a body that had already received and rejected the full gene seed. They could practice new organ placement, test rejection suppression protocols, attempt procedures too risky to try on viable aspirants. Petros would spend the rest of his life being cut open and experimented on, his body used to improve the transformation process for boys who came after him. "It's an honor," Chief Apothecary Claudius told him when he delivered the news. "Your suffering will ensure future aspirants have higher survival rates. Your body will advance the science of Astartes transformation. You will serve the chapter in this capacity until your body is no longer viable for experimentation, at which point you'll be granted the Emperor's peace. This is far preferable to servitor conversion or simple execution." Petros didn't respond. His eyes were empty, all hope drained out of him. He'd been given a choice between 3 horrors and told it was an honor. He would be a living laboratory specimen, kept alive through pain and surgery and violation of his body, until he was too damaged to provide useful data. Then they would kill him. That was the mercy the chapter offered to failed aspirants who'd served in combat. They transferred him to the experimental surgery wing that night. I tried to visit, but the security protocols wouldn't allow it. Failed aspirants undergoing experimental procedures were isolated from active chapter members to prevent emotional attachments that might compromise the apothecary's objectivity. I was locked out from seeing my brother ever again. The chapter had taken him, designated him as medical material, and erased him from our company roles as efficiently as if he'd died in combat. Sergeant Talion found me in the training cages, pounding my enhanced fists against the reinforced walls, trying to process what had happened. "It is the way of the chapter," he said quietly, his centuries of experience weighing on every word. "Petros's fate is tragic, but not unusual. Every generation of aspirants produces failures. Some die clean during implantation. Others die in combat after being designated scouts. And some, like Petros, fail after the transformation is complete. The chapter cannot afford to simply execute or release them. They know too much. They've received too much investment, and their bodies contain genetic material too valuable to waste. So we turn them into experiments," I said bitterly. "We torture them in the name of improving the process." "We use them," Talion corrected. "Every aspirant volunteers knowing the risks. Petros knew that rejection was possible. He knew that failure had consequences. He chose to accept those risks in pursuit of becoming Astartes. The fact that his body betrayed him after 2 years instead of during implantation doesn't change his oath. He swore to serve the chapter in whatever capacity he was capable. Now he serves as a test subject instead of a warrior. Both are valid forms of service. I wanted to argue that there was a difference between dying honorably in combat and being vivisected repeatedly in a surgical theatre. But Telian was my superior, a legendary scout sergeant who'd trained hundreds of aspirants over 2 centuries. Arguing with him would accomplish nothing except marking me as questioning chapter doctrine. And questioning doctrine was itself a form of failure, a sign that the psycho-indoctrination hadn't taken properly, that I might be unreliable in the field. I'd learned the first hard truth about being Astartes. We were weapons, nothing more. Our bodies belonged to the chapter. Our lives belonged to the Emperor. And if our genetic compatibility failed, if our enhanced organs turned against us, if we became liabilities instead of assets, the chapter would repurpose us without hesitation. There was no retirement, no disability discharge, no comfortable ending to service. You served until you died, or until you failed, and failure meant being converted into something useful. Petros had failed. Now he would serve the chapter by being cut open repeatedly, teaching the apothecaries how to avoid similar failures in future aspirants. His suffering had purpose. His torture had meaning. And we were expected to see this as acceptable, even honorable, because the alternative was admitting that the transformation process was horror from beginning to end. I completed my scout service 3 years later, received my full battle brother colors, and became an Astartes of the Ultramarines chapter. I never saw Petros again. I heard rumors that he was still alive in the experimental wing, still serving as a test subject, his body held together by machines and surgeries while they practiced new techniques on his failing organs. I heard he'd gone mad from the pain, that he screamed constantly, that they'd sedated him into catatonia just to keep him manageable during procedures. I heard a lot of rumors. The chapter never confirmed any of them. Petros had simply ceased to exist in any official capacity, erased from the rolls, forgotten by everyone except those of us who'd known him. That was what happened to failures. They disappeared into the apothecarian's depths and became something else, something the chapter needed but didn't acknowledge. And I learned to accept it, because I had no other choice, because I was Astartes now, and Astartes didn't question. They obeyed, they served, they killed in the Emperor's name and died with honor when their time came. Unless they failed, then they just disappeared, and no one talked about where they went or what was done with them. That was the second truth about being Astartes. Failure was worse than death, and the chapter had very specific uses for failures. Chapter 4. The Servitor Facilities. I discovered the full scope of what happened to failed aspirants during my 10th year as a battle brother. We'd returned to Macragga for refit and resupply after a brutal campaign against the Iron Warriors on Korvax Prime. 3 brothers had fallen in combat, their gene seed recovered and returned to the chapter, their names added to the honor rolls. Another 7 were in the Apothecarian, recovering from injuries that would have killed baseline humans, but were merely inconvenient for Astartes. We were undermanned, exhausted, and looking forward to the brief respite that Macragga offered. Captain Ventris assigned me to security detail in the fortress's lower levels, a routine posting that typically involved walking corridors and ensuring no unauthorized personnel accessed restricted areas. It was boring work, well beneath my capabilities, but apparently necessary while the regular security servitors underwent maintenance. I didn't question the assignment. You didn't achieve 10 years of service by questioning routine orders. The lower levels of the Ultramarines' fortress were a maze of chambers and corridors that extended miles beneath the surface, ancient constructions that dated back to the Great Crusade. Most served mundane purposes: storage, power generation, water treatment, manufacturing facilities. But some areas were restricted even to battle brothers, marked with Mechanicus seals and apothecarian warnings about biological hazards and ongoing experimental procedures. These were the sections I was assigned to patrol. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Even through my power armor's environmental seals, I could detect it. A mixture of antiseptic, ozone, industrial lubricant, and something organic that had been dead for too long. The air circulation was poor this deep, and whatever was happening in these chambers, it produced waste products that the ventilation system struggled to process. The corridor lumens flickered irregularly, maintained by servitors that clearly hadn't received proper upkeep in years. The servitors themselves were the second thing I noticed. They were everywhere in the lower levels, performing maintenance tasks, moving materials, operating machinery. But these weren't the standard models you saw throughout the Imperium. These were modified extensively, covered in augmetics and bionics that looked like they'd been attached without consideration for the host body's comfort or survival. Some were missing limbs entirely, replaced by industrial manipulators that served specific functions. Others had their skulls opened and visible brain matter protected only by clear plasteel domes, allowing direct access to their neural tissue for programming updates. They all had the Ultima symbol somewhere on their bodies, burned into flesh, welded onto metal components, carved into exposed bone. These weren't Mechanicus servitors or criminal conversions from the Arbites. These were chapter servitors, created from failed aspirants, transformed boys, whose bodies had received the Emperor's gene seed and been found wanting. Each one represented months or years of training, genetic screening, surgical enhancement, and psycho-indoctrination, all of it ending in lobotomization and conversion into a biological machine. I stopped in front of one that was performing maintenance on a power conduit, its augmetic arms working with mechanical precision. It had been male once, before conversion, its body showing the massive musculature and bone structure of partial Astartes transformation. Implants had been started but not completed, leaving it larger and stronger than human, but not nearly at Space Marine levels. Half its head was missing, replaced by a cogitator unit that processed commands and controlled its movements. But the other half was intact, showing a face that was young, maybe 17 or 18 standard years. A face frozen in an expression of confusion, as if the boy had died, not understanding what was happening to him. The servitor's remaining eye tracked to me as I approached, some subroutine recognizing Space Marine armor and pausing its task. Unit 742 acknowledges Space Marine presence, awaiting commands. The voice was synthetic, generated by a Vox unit implanted in its throat, all traces of human intonation removed. What were you before conversion? I asked, knowing the question was pointless. Servitors retained no memory of their previous existence. The lobotomization process wiped their consciousness completely, leaving only enough brain function to process basic commands and operate their augmetics. Unit 742, Maintenance Servitor, assigned to Power Systems. Deck 7 Alpha, no prior designation retained in memory, awaiting commands. But there was something else. A hesitation in its response, a fractional delay that suggested damaged programming or incomplete memory wipe. And in that one remaining human eye, just for an instant, I saw something that looked like recognition. Like somewhere in the shattered remains of whatever consciousness remained, this servitor knew it was talking to a Space Marine. Knew what it had tried to become. Knew what it had been reduced to. Carry on, I said, disturbed by the interaction. The servitor returned to its maintenance task without further response. I continued my patrol deeper into the restricted levels, following the designated route through areas marked as apothecary and secondary facilities and biological processing centers. The deeper I went, the worse the conditions became. The walls were covered in organic residue, some of it dried and flaking, some of it fresh and glistening. The servitors down here were in even worse condition, many of them showing signs of repeated surgeries, their bodies patchwork combinations of organic tissue, augmetics, and exposed mechanical components. Some were barely mobile, dragging themselves through their assigned tasks with damaged locomotion systems. Others were built into the walls themselves, their bodies serving as biological components in larger systems, kept alive by nutrient feeds and waste extraction tubes. I reached a massive chamber that my designation called Processing Center 7. The door was sealed with both Mechanicus and Apothecarian authorization logs, but my security clearance overrode them. The door ground open, and I stepped into horror. The chamber was enormous, easily 500 feet on each side, its ceiling lost in darkness above massive lumens arrays that cast everything in harsh white light. Rows of surgical theaters filled the space, each one occupied by a servitor in various stages of conversion or maintenance. Apothecary servitors worked at each station, themselves lobotomized and programmed for specific surgical tasks, their movements precise and emotionless as they cut into bodies and installed augmetics. No human or space marine surgeons supervised them. This was automated processing, servitors creating more servitors, a self-perpetuating system of conversion and maintenance. I walked between the rows, my power armor's footsteps echoing in the vast space. The subjects on the surgical tables were aspirants, I was sure of it. They had the size and bone structure of partial Astartes transformation, their bodies showing the enhancement of gene seed implantation, even as they lay opened and being modified. Some were awake, their eyes tracking uselessly as servitors worked on them, their mouths open in silent screams. The conversion process apparently didn't require anesthesia. Why waste resources on pain management for subjects that would have their consciousness erased anyway? At one station, an apothecary servitor was installing a cogitator unit into a subject's open skull, replacing perhaps 70% of the brain with mechanical processing equipment. The subject was young, couldn't have been more than 16, his body showing maybe 5 or 6 successful implants before rejection had set in. His remaining eye wept constantly, tears running down his face in an autonomic response that the servitor ignored completely. His consciousness was probably already gone, that eye weeping from nerve damage rather than emotional trauma. But I couldn't be certain, and the uncertainty made it so much worse. "What is this facility?" I demanded, my Vox speakers amplifying my voice through the chamber. A response came from speakers mounted in the ceiling, a synthesized voice that spoke with apothecarian authority. "This is Secondary Conversion Facility 7. Designation: Failed Aspirant Processing. Authorization Level Beta or higher required for detailed information. Your security clearance is Gamma. Access to full documentation denied. If you require clarification on chapter protocols regarding failed aspirant conversion, contact Chief Apothecary Claudius for authorization upgrade." I'd stumbled into something the chapter didn't want Battle Brothers to see too closely. The industrial-scale conversion of failed aspirants into servitors, processed and repurposed without individual consideration, their bodies used to create the labor force that maintained the fortress's deepest systems. Every servitor I'd seen in these lower levels had been human once, had tried to become Astartes, had failed at some stage of the process, and been deemed useful enough in body to be converted rather than simply executed. How many? Over 10,000 years of recruiting, testing, implanting, and occasionally failing, how many boys had ended up in facilities like this? The Ultramarines chapter recruited continuously, bringing in hundreds of aspirants every cycle. If 90% failed during implantation or training, and even a small percentage of those failures were converted rather than allowed to die, the numbers became staggering. Thousands, easily. Maybe tens of thousands across the chapter's entire history. An army of lobotomized servitors, all bearing the Ultima symbol, all maintaining the fortress that trained the warriors who'd succeeded where they'd failed. I found records in a data terminal near the chamber's entrance. My security clearance wasn't high enough to access detailed files, but I could see summary statistics. Processing Center 7 handled approximately 200 conversions per standard year. Failed aspirants from Ultramar's recruitment worlds who'd made it far enough through transformation to be valuable, but not far enough to serve as space marines. Some came from implantation failures, others from training accidents that left them damaged but salvageable. A few from psycho-indoctrination rejection. boys whose minds couldn't accept the conditioning necessary to function as Astartes. All of them ended here, processed through automated conversion, their consciousness erased and their bodies repurposed. The efficiency was admirable from a resource management perspective. The chapter invested significant assets in every aspirant. Converting failures into servitors ensured that investment provided return even when the primary goal wasn't achieved. No waste, no sentiment, just logical allocation of available resources. From a human perspective, it was an abattoir, a factory where boys who dreamed of becoming heroes were transformed into lobotomized slaves, their identities erased and their bodies turned into tools. Every servitor in this chamber had once been someone, had once had hopes, fears, personality, consciousness, all of it scooped out and replaced with cogitators and programming, leaving them as biological machines that retain no memory of what they'd been. I thought about Petros, who'd at least retained his consciousness, even as he served as a test subject. That had seemed like horror at the time, being experimented on while remaining aware. But seeing this facility, understanding the alternative, I realized Petros had actually received mercy. He was still Petros, still conscious, still aware of his identity and his service. These servitors were nothing. They'd been erased so thoroughly that calling them by their previous names would be factually incorrect. The boys who'd entered this facility no longer existed in any meaningful sense. A servitor approached me as I stood reviewing the data terminal, its movements stiff and mechanical. This one was older than most I'd seen, its organic components showing decades of wear, its augmetics outdated models that the Mechanicus had phased out centuries ago. It must have been converted during the early stages of my own recruitment cycle, maybe even someone from my selection group, one of the 283 boys who'd started trials with me and hadn't survived to see implantation. Unit 319, Security Notification Servitor. Your presence in Processing Center 7 has been logged and reported to Apothecarian Command. Chief Apothecary Claudius requests your immediate presence in his office. Please follow designated route to nearest transport system. I'd been caught, discovered where I shouldn't be, seeing things the chapter preferred that Battle Brothers didn't examine too closely. The servitor conversion facilities existed. Everyone knew that in abstract. But actually witnessing the scale and methodology was apparently above my security clearance. Claudius would want to know why I'd accessed Processing Center 7, what I'd seen, and whether I was going to be problematic about the chapter's disposal of failed aspirants. I took one last look at the rows of surgical theaters, at the servitors being created and maintained, at the industrial efficiency with which the chapter converted failure into utility. Then I followed the security servitor out of the chamber, the massive doors grinding shut behind me, sealing away the horror I'd witnessed. Chief Apothecary Claudius was waiting in his office when I arrived, his augmetic eye tracking my approach with mechanical precision. Behind him, displayed on the wall, was the Ultima symbol of the Ultramarines, rendered in precious metals and gems. The Emperor's finest, we called ourselves, humanity's hope against the darkness. And beneath our fortress, in chambers we didn't talk about, we created thousands of lobotomized slaves from boys who tried to join us. Brother Cadius, Claudius said, his synthesized voice neutral. We need to discuss what you saw today and what you'll do with that information, because I assure you, there are protocols for Battle Brothers who cannot reconcile themselves with necessary chapter practices, and those protocols are not pleasant. The threat was clear. I could accept what I'd seen and continue serving as a loyal Battle Brother, or I could object, question, refuse to compartmentalize the horror, and find myself on one of those surgical tables, my own consciousness erased and my enhanced body repurposed. The chapter took care of its failures, one way or another, and I was about to learn just how many different ways failure could be defined. Chapter 5. The Conversation Chief Apothecary. Claudius gestured to a chair across from his desk, a gesture that would have been polite in normal circumstances but felt like a threat given what I'd just witnessed. I sat carefully, my power armor's servos whining softly as I settled into the reinforced furniture. Through the office's viewport, I could see Macragge's capital city spread below us, millions of citizens going about their lives unaware of what happened in the fortress's depths. "You look disturbed, Brother Cadius," Claudius said, his augmetic eye focusing on my face with uncomfortable precision. "What you saw in Processing Center 7 has clearly affected you more than anticipated. This suggests either insufficient psycho-indoctrination during your transformation or an unusually strong retention of pre-Astartes' emotional responses. Both are concerning for different reasons. I chose my words carefully. Apothecaries had the authority to declare any Space Marine psychologically unfit for duty, and the procedures for dealing with unfit battle brothers weren't much better than servitor conversion. I understand the necessity of resource efficiency, I said, keeping my tone neutral. I understand that failed aspirants represent significant chapter investment that must provide return, but the scale of the operation surprised me. I wasn't aware we processed hundreds of conversions annually. Were you not? Claudius's synthesized voice carried what might have been amusement. Where did you imagine all the fortress's servitors came from? The Mechanicus provides some, certainly, but the specialized units required for Astartes facilities must be purpose-built. Failed aspirants are ideal source material. They've already received partial enhancement, making them stronger and more durable than baseline humans. They've undergone psycho-indoctrination, making them receptive to behavioral programming. They know the fortress's layout and protocols, reducing training requirements. Converting them into servitors is simply efficient use of available resources. They were aspirants, I said, unable to keep all emotion from my voice. Brothers in potential, if not in fact. They volunteered to serve the chapter as warriors. Converting them into lobotomized machines seems... Seems what? Claudius interrupted, his augmetic eye brightening slightly. Cruel, wasteful, dishonorable. Choose your accusation carefully, Brother Cadius, because each implies criticism of chapter doctrine, and criticism of doctrine is itself a failure that requires correction. The threat was explicit now. I was being warned to accept what I'd seen or face consequences. But I'd gone too far to back down completely, and something in me, some fragment of the boy I'd been before transformation, demanded answers even if those answers might doom me. They retained no memory of volunteering, I said carefully. The conversion process erases their consciousness completely. They serve the chapter, but they're not aware of serving. They exist without identity, without purpose beyond programming, without any continuity between what they were and what they became. If the goal is punishment for failure, this achieves it. But if the goal is service, wouldn't it be more effective to retain their consciousness and assign them to chapter serf duties? A aware servant is more valuable than a lobotomized one. Claudius was silent for a long moment, his augmetic eye dimming to a low glow. When he spoke again, his synthesized voice carried what might have been resignation. You're not the first to ask these questions, Brother Cadius. Every generation of recruits produces a few who cannot fully accept the necessities of transformation. Most learn to compartmentalize what they've seen and continue serving effectively. Some do not and require intervention. The question is which category you'll fall into. He gestured to a data slate on his desk. Let me show you something that may provide context. This is the historical record of chapter recruitment over the past millennium, compiled and analyzed for patterns. Pay attention to the failure rates and subsequent disposal methods. The data slate displayed information I'd never seen compiled so comprehensively. The Ultramarines recruited approximately 500 aspirants per year across all Ultramars recruitment worlds. Of those 500, approximately 450 failed before completing the full transformation. Of those 450 failures, perhaps 300 died during implantation or training, their deaths recorded and their gene seed recovered. The remaining 150 failed in ways that left them alive but unfit for service as Space Marines. Those 150 became the raw material for servitor conversion, medical experimentation, or other repurposing. Over a millennium, that represented 150,000 failed aspirants who'd been converted into something else. And that was just the Ultramarines. Across all 1,000+ Space Marine chapters, the numbers became astronomical. The Imperium requires servitors. Claudius said as I processed the data. Billions of them, performing tasks too dangerous or complex for standard automation, but beneath the dignity or capability of thinking humans. The Mechanicus produces most of them from vat-grown biological material or criminal conversions. But specialized servitors, like those required for Astartes facilities, require source material that's already been enhanced and indoctrinated. Failed aspirants meet those requirements perfectly. So we feed the Imperium's need for slaves, I said bitterly. We promise boys glory and transformation, then convert them into lobotomized machines when they fail. That's what the Emperor's finest do with volunteers who weren't quite good enough. Yes. Claudius's response was flat, without apology or justification. That is exactly what we do, and we do it because the alternative is worse. Would you prefer we simply execute failed aspirants, waste the investment completely, or perhaps release them back to their families, partially transformed and psychologically damaged, unable to integrate into normal society, or maybe just abandon them? Let them become feral post-humans, haunting Ultramar's wilds? I had no answer. Every alternative he proposed was terrible in its own way. Execution wasted resources. Release created dangerous outcasts. Abandonment was cruelty without purpose. Servitor conversion at least provided utility, turned failure into something that could serve, even if that service was unconscious and programmed. The truth, Brother Cadius, is that the transformation process is barbaric from beginning to end. Claudius continued, his synthesized voice carrying unexpected weight. We take children and we break their bodies on the altar of gene seed compatibility. We cut them open repeatedly and install organs that have significant failure rates. We condition their minds to accept violence and obedience as virtues. We erase their individuality and replace it with chapter identity. Those who survive become weapons of incredible capability but questionable humanity. Those who fail become other things. This has always been the nature of Astartes' creation. The Emperor designed it this way 10,000 years ago, and we perpetuate his design because the Imperium requires warriors capable of fighting impossible wars. And the Servitors? I asked. The boys who end up lobotomized and converted. What would the Emperor say about that? Claudius's augmetic eye flared brightly. The Emperor created the first Servitors, Brother Cadius. He designed the lobotomization process, established the protocols for converting human criminals and failures into biological machines. The entire Servitor system is his innovation, implemented during the unification wars on Terra itself. We are not corrupting his vision. We are implementing it exactly as he intended. The Emperor understood that the Imperium would require workers who could perform dangerous tasks without question, fear, or eventual rebellion. Servitors meet that need. Failed aspirants are simply one source of raw material for their creation. The casual way he explained it, the complete acceptance of horror as necessity, was more disturbing than the servitor facilities themselves. Claudius genuinely saw nothing wrong with the system. To him, it was simply efficient resource management, turning failure into utility, ensuring chapter investment provided return even when aspirants couldn't complete transformation. The boys who ended up on those surgical tables weren't individuals to be mourned. They were biological material to be processed. I see your struggle, Brother Cadius, Claudius said, his tone shifting slightly. You retain more pre-transformation empathy than most. Your psycho-indoctrination was sufficient for combat function, but perhaps not thorough enough for complete acceptance of chapter doctrine. This makes you an excellent warrior. Empathy for humans makes you fight harder to protect them, but it also makes you vulnerable to exactly this kind of crisis when you discover the harsher realities of our operations. What happens now? I asked directly. Am I going to end up in Processing Center 7 myself for questioning chapter practices? That depends entirely on you. Claudius pulled up another file on the data slate. There are two paths forward. First option, you accept what you've learned, compartmentalize it as necessary but unfortunate, and continue serving as a battle brother. You'll be monitored more closely for signs of doctrinal deviation, but absent any actual rebellion or refusal to follow orders, you'll remain in active service. Many battle brothers over the millennia have walked this path successfully. They know what happens in the depths, they're troubled by it, but they recognize that stopping it is beyond their authority and serve the chapter despite their discomfort. And the second option? You refuse to accept it, Claudius said flatly. You continue questioning. Perhaps speak to other battle brothers about what you've seen. Perhaps even attempt to interfere with servitor conversion procedures. In that case, you'll be declared psychologically unfit for duty due to incomplete indoctrination. You'll be remanded to my care for corrective procedures. Those procedures are extensive and invasive, involving direct manipulation of your brain's neurochemistry and memory engrams. If successful, you'll return to service with your doubts erased and your loyalty to chapter doctrine absolute. If unsuccessful, you'll be deemed a failed aspirant retroactively and processed accordingly. Servitor conversion. That's what processed accordingly meant. If I couldn't accept what the chapter did to failures, I would become one myself. My consciousness would be erased, my body repurposed, my identity reduced to a unit designation and work assignment. I'd become one of the lobotomized machines I'd seen in Processing Center 7, maintaining the fortress that I'd once fought to protect. Why tell me this? I asked. Why not just drag me to the apothecarian immediately and begin corrective procedures? Because you're a valuable battle brother, Cadius. 10 years of service, multiple campaigns, proven combat capability. Converting you would waste that investment. I'd prefer you choose acceptance willingly, incorporate this knowledge into your worldview without compromising your effectiveness. Many brothers succeed at this. The knowledge troubles them, but they continue serving effectively because they understand that stopping servitor conversion wouldn't save failed aspirants. It would just mean we'd have to get servitors from less optimal sources. He was giving me a choice, sort of. Accept the horror or become part of it. Continue serving despite what I knew, or refuse and face lobotomization myself. It wasn't really a choice at all, just the illusion of one. But apothecaries excelled at maintaining the illusion that Astartes had free will when the reality was far more constrained. I'll accept it, I said, the words tasting like poison. I'll serve the chapter despite what happens in Processing Center 7. Will you? Claudius's augmetic eye focused on me with uncomfortable intensity. Or are you simply telling me what I want to hear while planning to cause problems later? Because I assure you, Brother Cadius, if I have any doubt about your acceptance, I'll order corrective procedures immediately. The risk of having a battle brother questioning chapter doctrine openly is too great to tolerate half measures. I met his gaze directly, something I'd been trained never to do with superiors, but this seemed like the moment for it. I accept it, I said firmly. I find it disturbing, even horrifying. I think there should be better alternatives, but I recognize that I'm not in a position to change chapter policy, and I'm not going to sabotage my own service by crusading against practices I can't alter. I'll continue serving as a battle brother. I'll keep what I've learned to myself, and I'll try very hard not to think about the servitors maintaining our fortress. Claudius studied me for a long moment, his augmetic eyes scanning my face for signs of deception. Whatever analysis he performed, it apparently satisfied him. Very well, you're dismissed to return to your duties. Your security clearance will be upgraded to beta level, which will prevent future accidental discoveries of restricted facilities. And Brother Cadius, remember this conversation. Remember that acceptance is mandatory, and failure to accept is itself a form of failure. The chapter has been processing failures for 10,000 years. It will continue regardless of your approval. Your choice is whether to serve effectively despite it, or become another statistic in Processing Center 7. I left his office with my hands trembling inside my power armor's gauntlets. I'd survived the conversation, avoided corrective procedures and servitor conversion, but the cost was carrying knowledge I could never share, understanding horrors I could never prevent, serving a chapter that I now knew treated its failures as raw material for industrial processing. I thought about Petros, kept alive as a medical test subject. I thought about the servitors I'd seen, their consciousness erased and their bodies repurposed. I thought about every aspirant who'd ever failed, across all chapters, across all of human history since the Emperor had first created his Space Marines. How many? How many millions of boys had tried to become Astartes and been found wanting? How many had ended up on surgical tables, their minds scooped out and replaced with cogitators? How many currently maintain the Imperium's facilities, lobotomized and programmed, serving without consciousness or identity? The numbers were staggering, and there was nothing I could do about any of it except continue serving, continue fighting, continue being the weapon the chapter had transformed me into. The Emperor protects, they said. But he didn't protect failures. For them, there was only conversion, experimentation, or execution. Those were the alternatives the Imperium offered to boys who tried to become heroes and failed. And I just learned that questioning those alternatives was itself grounds for becoming one of them. Chapter 6. Living with Knowledge. I served for another 30 years after that conversation with Chief Apothecary Claudius. 30 years of campaigns across the Imperium, fighting orcs and traitors and Xenos threats with my battle brothers. 30 years of performing exactly as expected, never questioning orders, never expressing doubt about chapter practices. 30 years of being the perfect Ultramarine Space Marine, while carrying knowledge that made every return to Macragge's fortress a reminder of horror. The Servitors were everywhere once you knew to look for them, maintaining weapons in the armory, processing data in the strategium, performing medical tasks in the apothecarian, cleaning and repairing throughout the fortress's vast interior. Every single one bore the Ultima symbol somewhere on their augmented bodies. Every single one had been an aspirant once, a boy who'd volunteered to serve the chapter and been found wanting. They moved through their assigned tasks with mechanical precision, showing no awareness of their surroundings, no recognition of the Space Marines they served. I wondered sometimes if consciousness persisted somewhere beneath the lobotomization and programming. If some fragment of awareness remained, trapped inside a body that no longer responded to its will, forced to watch itself perform tasks without understanding why. The Mechanicus claimed that servitor conversion was total, that no original consciousness survived the process. But I'd seen that hesitation in Unit 742's response years ago, that fractional delay that suggested something remained. The possibility that failed aspirants might be aware of what they'd become, unable to communicate or control their actions but forced to experience existence as lobotomized machines, was worse than any enemy I'd faced in combat. My battle brothers didn't seem troubled by the Servitors' presence. Most had either never learned where they came from, or had learned and successfully compartmentalized the knowledge. Astartes were trained to accept necessary cruelties as part of service to the Imperium. We killed millions in the Emperor's name. We watched entire worlds burn when they fell to chaos or Xenos infestation. We inflicted violence that would traumatize baseline humans permanently. Servitor conversion was just another necessary cruelty in a long list of things we did because the Imperium required them. But I couldn't fully accept it. The psycho-indoctrination that made me an effective weapon had apparently failed to erase the part of me that recognized horror when I saw it. I followed orders perfectly, fought effectively, served the chapter without complaint. But inside my enhanced mind, some fragment of the boy I'd been before transformation continued objecting to what we did with failures. I tried to help when I could, in small ways that wouldn't draw attention. When I saw servitors malfunctioning or damaged, I reported them for maintenance more quickly than protocol required. When I commanded chapter serfs during operations, I made sure they received adequate rest and supplies, treating them more like valuable personnel than disposable labor. When new aspirants came to the fortress, I volunteered to speak with them about the transformation process, trying to give them realistic expectations without explicitly breaking the chapter's preference for hopeful ignorance. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough. But it was what I could do without crossing the line into actual rebellion against chapter doctrine. I walked a narrow path between acceptance and resistance, being useful enough to remain in service while maintaining enough humanity to recognize when I was participating in horror. The others from my original cohort handled it differently. Brother Tiberius, who transformed alongside me, fully accepted the servitor system as necessary and rarely gave it any thought. Brother Marcus threw himself into combat with such intensity that he barely spent time on Macragge at all, always volunteering for extended campaigns that kept him away from the fortress. Brother Severus requested transfer to a fleet-based company, spending years at a time aboard strike cruisers where servitors were less visible and their origins easier to ignore. We all found our coping mechanisms. We all learned to serve despite knowing what the chapter did to boys who'd been less fortunate or compatible than ourselves. We were the survivors, the statistical successes, the ones who'd made it through transformation intact. The servitors maintaining our fortress were the statistical failures, the ones whose genetics or bodies or minds had proven incompatible. That was just probability playing out across thousands of aspirants. Nothing personal, nothing malicious, just the inevitable result of trying to transform baseline humans into post-human warriors. I repeated these rationalizations to myself regularly. They never actually convinced me, but they allowed me to function. Cognitive dissonance was better than the alternative, which would be either full acceptance of the horror or full rejection that would lead to my own conversion. I chose a middle path of uncomfortable knowledge and continued service, being disturbed by what the chapter did while remaining too loyal, or too cowardly, to actually oppose it. The campaign on Tarentis changed something in me. We'd been deployed to suppress a chaos uprising, standard operation for Ultramarines. But this uprising was different. The cultists weren't corrupted by demonic influence or promises of power. They were factory workers who'd been pushed beyond endurance by the administratum's quotas, people who'd turned to chaos not because they believed in it, but because literally any alternative looked better than continuing to serve the Imperium. I killed them by the hundreds. Men, women, some barely out of childhood, all of them corrupted beyond salvation by their contact with warp entities. We burned their hive blocks, purged their facilities, cleansed entire sectors with fire and bolter shells. Standard procedure for chaos infestation. The Imperium didn't negotiate with heretics. It simply killed them all and moved on. But I saw their faces as I killed them. Saw the desperation that had driven them to embrace damnation. Saw how similar they were to the boys who failed Astartes' transformation. Both groups had been pushed beyond their limits by systems that viewed them as disposable. Both had broken under pressure that was designed to break most people. Both had been declared failures and dealt with accordingly. The cultists got bolt rounds to the head. The failed aspirants got lobotomization and servitor conversion. Different methodologies, same basic principle. The Imperium discarded people who couldn't meet its impossible standards. I stood in the ruins of a hab block on Tarentis, surrounded by the bodies of cultists I'd just killed, and I realized I couldn't keep serving this way. Not because I was going to rebel, that would accomplish nothing except my own conversion into a servitor, but because I needed to do something, anything, that wasn't just following orders and participating in horror while pretending it was necessary. I started documenting what I knew, writing down everything I'd seen in Processing Center 7, everything Claudius had told me, everything I'd observed about servitor creation over 30 years of service. I encoded the files heavily, storing them in personal data slates that I kept hidden in my quarters. I didn't know what I'd do with the documentation. Certainly I couldn't share it with anyone while I remained in active service. But writing it down felt like acknowledgement, like refusing to let the horror be completely normalized and forgotten. Brother Severus caught me once, working on the files late at night after returning from campaign. He stood in my doorway for a long moment, his enhanced eyes reading the text on my data slate before I could close it. Then, he simply nodded and walked away without comment. 2 days later, I found a data slate in my quarters that wasn't mine, containing his own observations about servitor conversion, his own documentation of horror he'd witnessed and couldn't accept. We never spoke about it directly, but we'd found each other. Two battle brothers who couldn't fully compartmentalize what we knew, who needed to document it, even if we could never act on that documentation. We weren't the only ones. Over the next few years, I discovered that perhaps 10% of battle brothers struggled with the servitor conversion system to some degree. Most learned to ignore it. Some, like Severus and I, documented it quietly. A very few couldn't accept it at all, and were remanded to the apothecarian for corrective procedures. The chapter had been dealing with this issue for 10,000 years. They had refined processes for identifying and handling battle brothers who questioned doctrine too openly. I learned to be more careful. I performed my duties flawlessly, volunteered for dangerous assignments, demonstrated absolute loyalty in every way that mattered. My private documentation continued, but I made sure it was encrypted thoroughly enough that casual scans wouldn't reveal it. I was walking a knife's edge between being a good battle brother and being a potential threat to chapter cohesion. Chief Apothecary Claudius called me to his office again in my 40th year of service. I'd been expecting it, knowing that my elevated attention to servitor maintenance and my careful questions about failed aspirant processing would eventually draw scrutiny. I prepared myself for corrective procedures, for the possibility that I'd finally crossed the line from troubled acceptance into unacceptable questioning. Instead, Claudius surprised me. "Brother Cadius," he said, his synthesized voice carrying something that might have been approval. "Your service record is exemplary. 40 campaigns, 60 confirmed kills of significant enemy targets, multiple decorations for valor. You're being considered for promotion to sergeant, with assignment to train new scout recruits. The position requires someone who understands the transformation process thoroughly and can prepare aspirants mentally for what they'll experience. Your documented concern for recruit welfare makes you an interesting candidate. The question is whether that concern is appropriate mentorship or troublesome sentiment that will interfere with your effectiveness. A test. Everything with Claudius was a test. If I accepted the position, I'd be responsible for training aspirants who would have perhaps a 10% chance of fully successful transformation. I'd watch them go through the same process I had, knowing that most would fail and be converted into servitors. I'd have to maintain chapter doctrine about the honor of transformation, while knowing exactly what happened to boys who weren't fortunate enough to succeed. It was also an opportunity. Sergeant of Scouts would give me influence over how aspirants were prepared, what they were told, how they understood their risks. I could be honest with them in ways that my own trainers hadn't been with me. I could make sure they knew what they were volunteering for, even if that knowledge didn't change the overall system. "I accept the position," I said carefully. "I believe my experience would allow me to prepare aspirants more effectively than someone who's fully compartmentalized the transformation's realities. They should understand both the glory of success and the risks of failure." Claudius's augmetic eye focused on me intensely. "And you'll follow chapter doctrine regarding what information is appropriate for aspirants to receive?" "I will." It was technically true. Chapter doctrine didn't explicitly forbid telling aspirants about servitor conversion. It simply preferred that they not think about it too carefully, that they focus on the potential for glory rather than the probability of failure. I could work within that preference while still being more honest than most trainers. "Very well. You're assigned to Scout Company 7, beginning next recruitment cycle. Try to remember, Brother Cadius, that your role is to produce successful Space Marines, not to generate doubt and fear in aspirants. The chapter has survived 10,000 years because we focus on what we create, not what we discard in the process of creation." I left his office with a new position and a new purpose. I would train aspirants. I would tell them the truth as much as chapter doctrine allowed. And I would document everything I saw, adding to the encrypted files that Severus and I maintained, building a record of what the chapter really did to its failures. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't even meaningful resistance, but it was something more than just accepting the horror and moving on. It was acknowledgement that what we did to failed aspirants was terrible, even if it was necessary. And someday, maybe, someone would read those files and understand the full cost of creating the Emperor's Angels of Death. Chapter 7, Training the Next Generation. The new recruitment cycle brought 300 aspirants to Macragge, boys ranging from age 12 to 15, all of them physically excellent and mentally prepared for the trials ahead. They stood in formation in the fortress's main plaza, their eyes full of hope and determination, dreaming of becoming Space Marines. Looking at them, I saw ghosts of everyone who'd failed before. Everyone who'd ended up on surgical tables in Processing Center 7. Every servitor currently maintaining the fortress they now stood within. I was assigned 60 aspirants initially, the boys who'd completed selection trials and been deemed worthy of attempting transformation. My role was to prepare them mentally and physically for the implantation process, to train them as scouts while their bodies underwent enhancement, and to help them understand what service to the chapter really meant. It was more responsibility than I'd had in 40 years of service, and more opportunity to influence how aspirants viewed their circumstances. Sergeant Tellian, who'd trained me decades ago, provided guidance on the technical aspects of scout training. But he was old even by Astartes standards, his body showing damage from centuries of warfare, his mind focused entirely on combat effectiveness, rather than the philosophical questions I struggled with. He was perfect at producing warriors. He had no interest in producing warriors who questioned their purpose. I took a different approach. On the first day of training, I gathered my 60 aspirants in a lecture hall and spoke to them honestly about what they'd volunteered for. The implantation process has a 90% failure rate, I told them, watching their expressions shift from confidence to uncertainty. Most of you will not become Space Marines. Some will die during transformation, your bodies rejecting organs that weren't meant for baseline humans. Others will fail in ways that leave you alive but unable to continue. The chapter does not simply release you if you fail. You will be reassigned to positions where your partially transformed bodies can still serve. These positions are not glorious. They are not what you're dreaming of now, but they are service nonetheless. And you should understand that possibility before your first implantation. One boy raised his hand, his face troubled. His name was Lucian, and he'd scored in the top percentile on all selection trials. Sergeant Cadius, what positions? What happens to boys who fail but survive? This was the moment I'd been planning for. The opportunity to be more honest than chapter doctrine preferred. I chose my words carefully, staying within technical accuracy while providing information most trainers omitted. Some become chapter serfs, serving in administrative or support roles. Some become test subjects for medical experimentation, helping to refine the implantation process for future aspirants. Some are converted into servitors, their enhanced bodies repurposed for maintenance and labor tasks. All of these are valid forms of service to the chapter. None are equivalent to serving as a Space Marine. The hall erupted in whispers. Several boys looked genuinely frightened, perhaps for the first time understanding that failure didn't mean simply going home with honor. Others looked angry, as if I'd betrayed some unspoken agreement by being too explicit about risks. Lucian's expression was thoughtful, processing the information rather than rejecting it emotionally. "Can we withdraw?" another boy asked. His name was Matthias, smaller than most aspirants but incredibly fast during trials. "If we're not willing to accept those risks, can we leave now?" "Theoretically, yes," I said honestly. "But understand that withdrawal after selection is recorded permanently in your file. You would return to your families marked as someone who reached the threshold of transformation and chose not to continue. Most communities view this as cowardice. You'd likely face social consequences for the rest of your lives. The chapter would not permit you to apply for any other service positions, including Imperial Guard recruitment. Withdrawal is an option, but not a practical one for most aspirants." 3 boys withdrew that day, 3 out of 60, deciding that the risks I'd described outweighed their dreams of becoming Astartes. Sergeant Tellian was furious when he learned I'd driven recruits away with excessive honesty. He reported me to Chief Apothecary Claudius, claiming I was sabotaging the recruitment process by generating fear rather than confidence. Claudius summoned me to his office immediately. I expected discipline, possibly removal from the training position, possibly even corrective procedures for violating the spirit of chapter doctrine, even if I'd stayed within its letter. Instead, Claudius surprised me again. 3 withdrawals out of 60 is actually lower than historical averages, he said, reviewing data on his terminal. Most training cycles lose 5 to 8 aspirants to withdrawals, usually during the first implantation, when reality becomes impossible to ignore. You've apparently reduced withdrawals by making reality clear earlier, allowing boys who would have failed anyway to recognize it before the chapter invested resources in their implantation. This is unexpectedly efficient. I was trying to be honest with them, I said carefully. They deserve to understand what they're volunteering for. And you've achieved that without technically violating doctrine, Claudius observed. You told them facts about post-failure assignments. You didn't embellish or editorialize. You simply provided information that most trainers omit. The result is fewer withdrawals and presumably better mental preparation for the aspirants who continue. I'm not certain whether to commend you for efficiency or discipline you for approaching doctrine's boundaries so deliberately. The boys should know, I said firmly. They should understand that failure has consequences beyond death. If that knowledge makes them train harder or think more carefully about their commitment, that produces better aspirants. If it makes them withdraw, that's better than wasting implantation resources on boys who would have failed anyway. Claudius studied me with his augmetic eye for a long moment. Continue your current methodology, he finally said, but understand that if your honesty produces aspirants who question chapter doctrine or speak openly about servitor conversion, you will be held responsible. Your goal is to prepare them mentally for transformation, not to generate dissidents who trouble the chapter with philosophical objections to necessary practices. I returned to training with a strange victory. I'd been permitted to continue being honest with aspirants, at least within carefully defined boundaries. It wasn't permission to speak freely about the horror of servitor conversion, but it was acknowledgement that preparing aspirants mentally for all possible outcomes produced better results than maintaining hopeful ignorance until failure became unavoidable. The 57 remaining aspirants in my cohort began implantations within the month. The first organ was always the biscopea, the secondary heart, with its historical 40% failure rate. I sat with them before their surgeries, each boy strapped to a surgical altar, while apothecaries prepared their organ for installation. I told them what to expect: the sensation of dual heartbeats, the fever as their bodies fought rejection, the week of isolation while their systems adapted or failed. I also told them quietly what would happen if they failed, that their bodies would be examined for salvageable components, that usable organs would be extracted for future aspirants, that the remains would be processed according to apothecarian protocols, which meant conversion or experimentation, depending on the degree of transformation they'd achieved. Some boys took comfort in knowing, preferring explicit truth to uncertain fear. Others became more frightened, but fought through that fear to survive. 15 failed the biscopea. I watched each one's vital signs deteriorate. Watched the apothecaries declare them incompatible and begin extraction surgery. Watched their bodies being wheeled to Processing Center 7, or the experimental surgery wing. 3 of them had been in the top 10 during selection trials, physically perfect specimens who'd simply had incompatible genetics despite all screening. They'd trained for years, dreamed their entire lives, and been defeated by probability playing out through organ rejection. The survivors looked at me differently after seeing their brothers fail. They understood now, in ways that words couldn't convey, what the stakes actually were. They trained harder, pushed themselves further, accepted pain and difficulty without complaint, because the alternative was ending up on one of those surgical tables. My honesty hadn't made them weak or doubtful. It had made them desperate to succeed, determined to be among the statistical minority who made it through full transformation. Over 18 months, my cohort of 57 was reduced to 8. Organ failures, training accidents, psychological breaks during psycho-indoctrination. Each failure was documented, each body processed, each loss acknowledged briefly before moving on to train the survivors. I wrote about each of them in my encrypted files, preserving their names and circumstances, refusing to let them become anonymous statistics. The 8 survivors received their black carapace, the final organ that would allow them to interface with power armor. They'd made it. Against 90% odds, they'd achieved full transformation. They would become Scout Marines, train in combat, and eventually receive the chapter's colors as full battle brothers. They'd won the terrible lottery of gene seed compatibility. Lucian, who'd asked about failure consequences on the first day, was among the survivors. He sought me out after receiving his black carapace, his enhanced body towering over the boy he'd been 18 months ago. "Thank you, Sergeant Cadius," he said quietly, "for telling us the truth. It made the difference for me. Every time I wanted to give up during implantation, I thought about ending up as a servitor, and I found the will to continue. Fear of failure kept me alive." "Good," I said, meaning it. "Use that fear. Remember what you've survived and what you could have become. It will make you a better warrior, knowing what you've avoided." But I thought about the 49 boys from my cohort who hadn't survived. About 15-year-old Matthias, whose catalepsian node had hemorrhaged his brain, killing him instantly. About 14-year-old Gregor, whose body had rejected all organs simultaneously during the hemastomen installation. About 17-year-old Castor, who'd survived all implantations perfectly but suffered psychological break during psycho-indoctrination, his mind unable to accept the violence he was being trained to inflict. All of them had been processed. Matthias's body was still useful for servitor conversion, despite brain death. Gregor had become a test subject for repeated implantation procedures. Castor, with his intact body but shattered mind, had been lobotomized and converted into a medical servitor, his partially transformed strength perfect for moving patients in the apothecarian. I'd trained them knowing that most would fail. I'd been honest with them about consequences. But I'd still participated in a system that took children and turned them into weapons or machines, with no middle ground for those who tried their best and simply weren't compatible. That knowledge sat heavy in my enhanced chest, a weight that no amount of rationalization could lift. Sergeant Tellian found me after the cohort completed transformation, sitting alone in the observation gallery above Processing Center 7, watching servitors perform their assigned tasks. "You did well," he said, his ancient voice carrying approval. 8 survivors from 57 initial recruits is above average. Your methodology, while unconventional, appears effective. 49 failures, I said quietly. 49 boys who are now servitors or test subjects or dead. That's what above average produces. That's what transformation produces, Tellian corrected. It has always been thus. It will always be thus. The gene seed is not compatible with most human genetics. We cannot change that fundamental reality. We can only work within it, maximizing success rates while minimizing waste of failed candidates. You've succeeded at both. Your honesty prepared survivors better while ensuring failures were processed efficiently. This is all anyone can ask of an Astartes trainer. He was right, and that made it worse. I'd succeeded at my role by being honest about horror while perpetuating that horror efficiently. The 8 survivors were better warriors because I'd scared them with truth. The 49 failures had been processed effectively because I'd documented them thoroughly. I'd optimized the system while being troubled by what that system produced. I continued training new cohorts. Over 10 years as Scout Sergeant, I processed 600 aspirants through transformation. 38 survived to become full battle brothers. 562 failed and were repurposed accordingly. Each one was documented in my encrypted files. Each one had a name, a story, a moment when their body or mind proved incompatible with the Emperor's gene seed. And each one ended up as a servitor or a test subject or dead. Their dreams of serving as Space Marines transformed into unconscious labor or experimental surgery or merciful execution. That was what the Imperium did with failures. That was what the chapter I served had done for 10,000 years. I was part of it now, fully and completely. Not just aware of the horror, but actively participating in it, making it more efficient through honest preparation of aspirants. I couldn't claim innocence or distance anymore. I was complicit in every servitor conversion, every experimental subject, every failure that I'd trained and documented and sent to Processing Center 7. The Emperor protects, they said, but he didn't protect failures. For them, there was only the horror I helped perpetuate. Chapter 8. The breaking point. It was a servitor designated Unit 976 who finally broke me completely. 47 years after my initial discovery of Processing Center 7, 50 years of total service to the chapter, I encountered a conversion that I couldn't rationalize or compartmentalize or accept as necessary. This particular servitor had been assigned to maintain weapons in the Scout Armory, a routine position that thousands of similar units had filled over the chapter's history. But there was something wrong with its lobotomization, some flaw in the conversion process that left fragments of original consciousness accessible. It spoke to me, not through standard servitor response protocols, but actual speech, personality bleeding through corrupted programming. "Sergeant Cadius?" The voice was synthesized, but somehow familiar, speaking my name with recognition that servitors weren't supposed to retain. Training, cohort, 17, designation, Matthias. Matthias, one of mine, a boy I'd trained 6 years ago, whose catalepsy node hemorrhage I'd witnessed personally. He'd been declared brain-dead, unsuitable even for test subject status, and assigned for immediate servitor conversion. His body had been repurposed into Unit 976, a weapons maintenance servitor with no memory of what it had been, except the conversion had apparently failed partially, leaving some fragment of Matthias aware inside the lobotomized shell. "How much do you remember?" I asked, my enhanced voice dropping to a low rumble. Around us, the armory was empty, Night Cycle having reduced activity to minimal staffing. We were alone with this horrifying malfunction. "Pieces," Unit 976 said, its synthesized voice stuttering. "Selection trials, running, mountains, pain, trials, not screaming. Transformation. Head. Wrong. Then. Nothing. Then. This. Maintenance. Weapons. Forever. Aware. But. Cannot. Control. Body. Only. Watch. Only. Feel. Servitor. Prison. Please." The last word was desperate, carrying emotion that its mechanical vocal system shouldn't have been able to produce. Please. Please what? Please help. Please kill it. Please acknowledge that it was still partially conscious, still aware, still experiencing existence as a lobotomized machine, forced to perform tasks it didn't understand with a body it couldn't control. I should have reported the malfunction immediately. Protocol required that servitors showing signs of consciousness retention be returned to the apothecarian for corrective procedures, which meant more surgery, deeper lobotomization, ensuring that no awareness remained. That was the merciful response. Leaving Matthias trapped in partial consciousness, aware but unable to communicate or control anything, was crueler than completing the conversion properly. But I couldn't do it. Couldn't send him back to the surgical tables to have the last fragments of his consciousness erased. He'd already been processed once, already had his identity stolen and his body repurposed. Sending him back for correction felt like killing him a second time. "What do you want, Matthias?" I asked quietly. "What can I do?" "Death," Unit 976 said immediately. "Real. Death. Not this existence. Cannot. Die. Servitor. Body. Maintained. Automatically. Cannot. Self-terminate. Please. Sergeant. Mercy." He wanted me to kill him, destroy the servitor body so thoroughly that even apothecarian procedures couldn't repair it, granting him the death that should have come when his catalepsian node hemorrhaged. It was a simple request. A few seconds with my bolt pistol would reduce Unit 976 to unsalvageable components. The chapter would requisition a replacement servitor and never investigate why this one had failed. It would be mercy, ending suffering that should never have been possible in the first place. It would also be murder of chapter property. Servitors belonged to the Ultramarines, assets assigned to specific duties, maintained and repaired as needed. Deliberately destroying one without authorization was a crime, a violation of resource management protocols, potentially grounds for discipline or corrective procedures. I'd be investigated, my encrypted files might be discovered, my decades of private documentation exposed. Everything I'd hidden could come out because I'd shown mercy to a failed aspirant, whose conversion had malfunctioned. I drew my bolt pistol anyway. 50 years of service, 50 years of watching boys get processed into servitors, 50 years of accepting horror as necessary. And this one malfunction, this one case, where the victim remained conscious enough to beg for death, was apparently my breaking point. I couldn't save Matthias, couldn't undo what had been done to him, but I could grant his request. I could give him the mercy the chapter had denied. "Thank you," Unit 976 said, its synthesized voice somehow conveying relief. "Thank you, Sergeant." I fired one bolt round at point-blank range into the servitor's torso, aiming for the power core that sustained its mechanical components. The explosive bolt detonated inside the servitor's chest cavity, destroying both organic and augmetic systems simultaneously. Unit 976 collapsed, its body too damaged for even apothecarian procedures to repair. Matthias was dead finally and completely, released from the prison his lobotomized body had become. I reported the incident as a malfunction, claiming Unit 976 had shown signs of mechanical failure and had accidentally caught a bolt round during weapons maintenance procedures. My security clearance and reputation were sufficient that the initial investigation accepted my report without extensive questioning. But Chief Apothecary Claudius requested a meeting, his augmetic eye clearly suspicious about the circumstances. Unit 976's damage pattern is inconsistent with accidental exposure to bolt round detonation, he said, displaying forensic scans on his terminal. The angle of impact and the explosive spread suggest deliberate targeting of the power core at close range. This appears to be intentional destruction of chapter property rather than an accident. I could have lied, could have constructed a more detailed false narrative to explain the damage. Instead, I made a choice that I'd been avoiding for 50 years. I told him the truth. Unit 976 was Matthias from my training cohort 6 years ago, I said calmly. His servitor conversion was flawed. He retained partial consciousness and was aware of his existence as a lobotomized machine. He begged me for death. I granted his request. If that's destruction of chapter property requiring discipline, I accept the consequences. Claudius was silent for a long time, his augmetic eye dimming to a low glow. When he finally spoke, his synthesized voice carried something I'd never heard from him before: uncertainty. You've been documenting failed aspirants for decades. I've known about your encrypted files since you created them. I've allowed them to continue because your service record was exemplary and your documentation didn't interfere with your effectiveness. But this is different. This is active intervention, destruction of servitor assets, because you disapproved of the conversion result. This is the line between troubled acceptance and unacceptable resistance. I know, I said. I've walked that line for 50 years. Apparently Matthias is where I finally crossed it. You understand the consequences? Claudius asked. I must report this. The chapter master will order corrective procedures at minimum, possibly full servitor conversion if they decide you're too compromised to trust as a battle brother. Everything you've documented, everything you've hidden, it will all be exposed and purged. You'll be declared psychologically unfit due to incomplete psycho-indoctrination, and you'll be processed the same way you've watched hundreds of aspirants processed. Was granting mercy to one defective servitor worth that cost? Was it? I'd served for 50 years, fought in 100 campaigns, killed thousands of the Emperor's enemies. I'd trained hundreds of aspirants and documented their fates when they failed. I'd been an effective Ultramarine space marine despite carrying knowledge that troubled me. All of that would end now, because I couldn't ignore a failed conversion that left its victim conscious and begging for death. Yes, I said firmly. It was worth it, because Matthias deserved mercy, because every failed aspirant who ends up conscious inside a servitor body deserves mercy, because the system that produces that suffering is wrong even if it's efficient. I've served the chapter loyally for 5 decades, but I can't serve a system that considers partial consciousness in lobotomized victims an acceptable side effect of conversion procedures. If recognizing that makes me psychologically unfit, then I'm unfit. Claudius stared at me with his augmetic eye for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he made a decision that surprised me completely. You won't be reported, he said quietly. Unit 976's destruction will be recorded as equipment malfunction due to defective conversion. Your files will remain undiscovered. You'll continue serving as Scout Sergeant, and I'll implement new protocols for servitor conversion quality control, ensuring that partial consciousness retention is identified and corrected immediately. This conversation never happened. Why? I asked, genuinely confused. I've just admitted to destroying chapter property and questioning doctrine. Protocol requires you report me. Protocol requires many things, Claudius said, his synthesized voice carrying weight. But I've been chief apothecary for 3 centuries, Brother Cadius. I've overseen the conversion of tens of thousands of failed aspirants, and in all that time, no one has ever documented them the way you have. No one has ever cared enough to preserve their names and circumstances. Your encrypted files are the only record we have of individual failures beyond statistical data. That has unexpected value. He pulled up a file on his terminal, displaying my encrypted documentation. You've recorded 17,342 failed aspirants over your 50 years of service. Every single one has a name, circumstances of failure, and processing disposition. This is comprehensive historical data that the chapter didn't maintain because we never considered it necessary. But looking at it now, I see patterns in organ rejection rates, genetic markers that predict failure, environmental factors that influence compatibility. Your documentation, created because you couldn't accept the horror of what we do, has inadvertently provided data that could improve future transformation success rates. I processed this information slowly. My secret documentation, my private rebellion against forgetting the failed, had apparently created a medical database valuable enough that Claudius was willing to overlook my destruction of a defective servitor. The horror I'd recorded had become useful to the system that created it. So I've accidentally served the chapter by documenting what troubles me, I said bitterly. My resistance has been converted into efficiency improvement. Yes, Claudius agreed, though I don't think you'll find that as disturbing as you expect, because I'm giving you expanded access to all failed aspirant records going back 1,000 years. I want you to continue your documentation, but with full chapter authorization and resources. You'll serve as records keeper for failed aspirant processing, a new position that will allow you to track conversions, identify defective procedures, and ensure that failures like Matthias's partial consciousness don't recur. You'll still train scout cohorts, but your primary duty will be maintaining the historical record you've already started. A position, official authorization to do what I'd been doing secretly for decades, with resources to do it better. I'd be legitimizing the system by documenting it thoroughly, making servitor conversion more efficient by identifying and correcting failures. Everything I'd done to resist would become part of the apparatus itself. But I'd also be preserving their names. Every failed aspirant would be recorded as an individual rather than a statistic. Matthias's death would have meaning because I'd documented his life and his fate and his final request for mercy. The 17,000 I'd already recorded would be joined by thousands more, creating a comprehensive memorial to everyone who tried to become Astartes and failed. I accept, I said finally, on one condition, that we work to reduce servitor conversion rates, not just optimize them. If my documentation shows ways to improve initial screening or implantation procedures that increase survival, we implement those changes. The goal becomes producing more successful Space Marines by generating fewer failures, not just processing failures more efficiently. Claudius's augmetic eye brightened slightly. Agreed. Your documentation has already suggested several genetic markers that predict rejection with 90% accuracy. We can test for those during initial selection, eliminating aspirants who will almost certainly fail before they undergo training and implantation. This reduces waste, improves efficiency, and has the side effect you prefer. Fewer boys ending up on conversion tables. I'd become part of the system, fully, officially, with authorization and resources. But I'd also force the system to acknowledge individual failures, rather than just statistical inevitability. Every servitor would have a name now. Every failed aspirant would be documented. And maybe, eventually, my documentation would help reduce the horror, even if it couldn't eliminate it entirely. 50 years of service had led here, to official recognition of secret resistance, to authorization for private documentation, to conversion of rebellion into institutional reform. I didn't know whether to consider it victory or defeat. Both, probably. The Imperium specialized in converting resistance into compliance, in making rebels into reformers who improved the system they'd tried to oppose. But Matthias was dead, released from the prison his defective conversion had created, and I'd face no consequences for granting that mercy. That had to count for something. One more thing, Claudius said as I prepared to leave. Your encrypted files mention that Brother Severus maintains similar documentation. I'll be offering him the same position, creating a dedicated department for failed aspirant record keeping. Between you, we'll have comprehensive coverage of all Ultramar recruitment worlds. This will become a model for other chapters if our preliminary results show improved efficiency. I nodded, recognizing the full scope of what was happening. My private documentation was becoming chapter policy. My resistance was being institutionalized, converted into approved procedure, made part of the system I'd been quietly opposing. Severus and I would become administrators of the very process that troubled us, our documentation serving to optimize what we documented in hopes of exposing. And maybe that was acceptable. Maybe working within the system to reduce harm was better than maintaining pure opposition while accomplishing nothing. Maybe the choice wasn't between acceptance and resistance, but between ineffective resistance and effective reform. I reported to my new office the next day, a chamber deep in the fortress's records section, its walls lined with data terminals and storage systems. Brother Severus was already there, his own encrypted files being integrated into the larger database. Together, we began the official work we'd been doing secretly for decades, documenting the failed, preserving their names, identifying patterns that might prevent future failures. It wasn't what I'd imagined when I'd started secretly recording aspirant fates 50 years ago, but it was something, a memorial to the failed, a database that acknowledged their individual existence, a system that might eventually reduce the horror, even if it could never eliminate it entirely. The Emperor protects, they said, but for those he didn't protect, for the failures and the converted and the experiments, at least now someone would remember their names.